Well, the latest news from Hurricane Ian continues to be devastating. Obviously, the strike by Hurricane Ian on the west coast of Florida has had some dire consequences. Some hundreds of people apparently missing. The Florida government is doing an excellent job of ensuring that the resources have been brought to bear. You have emergency teams that are on the ground essentially right away looking for people, trying to help out any survivors. The state itself is mobilizing, not just in terms of state resources, but also in terms of private charities. Pretty much every private institution in Florida has been mobilizing, trying to gather food and resources for people who are out of power on the west coast of Florida. The storm, Hurricane Ian, continues to actually swirl around off now the east coast of the United States. It's going to make landfall again in South Carolina. It may, in fact, be a hurricane at that point. According to the Washington Post, Ian is a hurricane once again, a storm system that re-intensified Thursday evenings. It churns toward South Carolina with 85-mile-per-hour winds. And what the National Hurricane Center called life-threatening flooding and storm surge, it's set for yet another U.S. landfall, this time near Charleston around midday on Friday. In its wake, Ian left a path of devastation in Florida, though much of the state is still making sense of the exact toll after rescue missions began on Thursday. In an evening briefing, Governor Ron DeSantis said that he expected to have mortality from the hurricane. There had been more than 700 confirmed rescues thus far. He also spoke of indescribable damage, including buildings picked up off their foundations by the intense wind. More than 2.1 million customers remain without power in Florida. In Virginia, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, governors declared states of emergency ahead of Ian's expected shift in their direction. Ron DeSantis yesterday visited the Hurricane Relief Center in Florida, and here's what he had to say.
There's going to be a lot of people that need help, and I know you guys have been on the front lines of doing that. So I just want to say thank you. We'll be back. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll probably be back, every day for a while. And so we're here to help. And when you guys need anything, he knows to call. All these other people know. Just give us a call, and I'll make sure Kevin gets it done. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
As we say, there's now an attempt being made to rescue people who are stuck in places like Fort Myers, people who stayed in their homes because they couldn't leave or because they made a bad decision to stay in their homes. There's also an attempt to get the power back on because, again, a couple million people do not have power at this point. Governor DeSantis said they absolutely expect to have mortality again. Nobody knows the death toll at this point from this storm. For his part, President Biden did a good thing yesterday. He was asked about Florida and Governor DeSantis and his relationship with DeSantis. He was visiting FEMA. And he said that it's not worth politicizing all of this, that he and Governor DeSantis are working together, which is exactly what the president is supposed to say.
How would you describe your relationship and your conversation with Governor DeSantis?
It's totally irrelevant, but I'll answer it, okay? In fact, very fine. He complimented me. He thanked me for the immediate response we had. He told me how much he appreciated it, said he was extremely happy with what was going on. This is not about whether anything having to do with our disagreements politically. This is about saving people's lives, homes, and businesses. That's what this is about. And so I've talked to him 4 or 5 times already. And it's not a matter of my disagreements with him on other items.
That is absolutely correct from the president, and good for him. He couldn't resist a little bit of a jab about climate change because no one on the left can resist a jab about climate change, despite the fact that, once again, there's no evidence that hurricanes have become either more common or more intense around Florida thanks to climate change. That is not according to me. That is according to the head of the National Oceanographic Institute for the United States, the head of the Hurricane Center. Anyway, here is Joe Biden.
Our commitment to tackling the climate crisis, which threatens all of us. We're seeing the consequences of climate change around the world very vividly, including in the United States right now. And I know your nations feel it acutely, and for you all, it's an existential threat.
Some members of the media can't help but go after Ron DeSantis. The New York Times had a piece on the front page of their website going after the governor of Florida. Why? Because he voted against a boondoggle hurricane relief bill that was not a hurricane relief bill during Hurricane Sandy. So the New York Times is now just trying to retcon what happened during Hurricane Sandy. If you recall, there was a bill that was put forward by the House and Senate Republicans that was just aid for Hurricane Sandy. That was voted for by all the Republicans. And then there was this enormous bill that included an extraordinary amount of pork that the Democrats put forward, and many Republicans voted against that. So the New York Times now claims that when Ron DeSantis was in Congress, he voted against aid for Sandy. That is not true. He voted in favor of aid for Sandy. He voted against a bill that included a bunch of other crap in it. But the New York Times headline, quote, DeSantis wants a no on storm aid, petitions a president he's bashed. So let me just get this straight. If the president of the United States is somebody that you politically oppose, you are no longer allowed to access the resources available from FEMA. So just to get this straight, if you were a Democratic governor during Donald Trump, you were not allowed to petition the federal government. In fact, I remember during COVID, every blue governor begging the federal government for resources. And the idea was that if Trump didn't give them the resources, it was because it was political and bad. But now if DeSantis even asks for the resources, according to the New York Times, this means that he is political and a hypocrite. So you see how this dumb game works. For the New York Times, Matt Flegenheimer reporting, as a freshman congressman in 2013, Ron DeSantis was unambiguous. A federal bailout for the New York region after Hurricane Sandy was an irresponsible boondoggle, a symbol of the put it on the credit card mentality he'd come to Washington to oppose. He said, I sympathize with the victims, but his answer was no. Nearly a decade later, as his state confronts the devastation and costly destruction wrought by Hurricane Ian, Mr. DeSantis is appealing to the nation's better angels and betting on its short memory. Well, no, he's not betting on its short memory. He literally voted in favor of a certain amount of aid for Hurricane Sandy, but Barack Obama and the Democrats crammed through a bill that was way more aid than was necessary for Hurricane Sandy. This is a very open debate at the time. But again, the goal of the New York Times here is to suggest that Ron DeSantis is suddenly a socialist, that Ron DeSantis is suddenly a fan of big government. It's the stupidest form of politics here because FEMA exists. FEMA is funded. FEMA was created specifically for this thing. And now FEMA is bringing its resources to bear. The debate over whether the federal government should be involved in solving state-level issues like this, right? That debate, I think, should be open theoretically, but it has not been open on a practical level since, as I said yesterday, about 1895. For a very, very long time in the United States, there's been an understanding the federal government is going to bring its resources to bear when there's a major natural disaster in the United States. This has been true for well over 100 years. And so this notion that Ron DeSantis is doing something unprecedented or evil or violative of his principles by, as the governor of the state, saying to FEMA, an institution created just for this, we need your help on this one, is absurd. It's also absurd because, again, they're retconning this thing because the notion that Hurricane Sandy was the breaking point for DeSantis, and DeSantis didn't vote for it. He did vote for aid. He just didn't vote for all of the pork. In a local interview that year, DeSantis said the bill contained extraneous stuff that could not be classified as emergency spending. He said, I never made the point of saying we shouldn't do anything. He did support in favor of a relief package. That was like $17 billion for Hurricane Sandy. Governor DeSantis supported an aid package in 2017 after Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria, as places like Florida, Texas, and Puerto Rico strained to recover. So again, this is a very stupid article by the New York Times, but this is perfectly typical of the New York Times and the media looking for some sort of excuse to go after Governor DeSantis. And of course, you have Joy Reid, the dumbest form of left-wing commentator on the air over on MSNBC, doing the same thing.
When Ron DeSantis had the opportunity to make that decision and say, well, should the people of New York and New Jersey who were hit by a catastrophic hurricane, they weren't even used to, they're not even in Florida, they're not used to hurricanes. Right. He said, no, that shouldn't happen. He, Marco Rubio, and other Tea Party members, Senate and House, said they shouldn't have that money. It's too expensive. And now, as you said, he's now got to go hand in hand to Joe Biden for aid. Right. It's something he didn't even believe in as a Tea Partier.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's just a lie. But they continue to lie because, after all, Ron DeSantis is a very, very bad man. And so they have to continue to promulgate the idea that Ron DeSantis is a very, very bad man. Again, we're not going to know the extent to which the Florida government has done a good job on this hurricane until probably a week or two out. But as I said at the very beginning of this, the media is going to be looking for any indicator at all, that Ron DeSantis isn't personally rappelling from helicopters in order to save dogs in Fort Myers, in order to demonstrate that he is not fit to run for the presidency in 2024 because they are scared of the governor of Florida. And so they're just making things up. Alrighty, guys, the rest of the show is continuing now. You're not going to want to miss it. We'll be getting into Vladimir Putin ramping up the aggression. Plus, Berkeley apparently now has a Jew-free zone. If you're not a member, click the link in the description and join us.